Hi. Can you hear me?
Hello, good evening. Hi, Liz. How are you? Hello, hello.
I'm good, good. Good to
Hi.
see you.
We are just there live on YouTube. I think we should stop sharing. Yeah, so I have to close this window, by the way. Yeah, okay. Sorry. Okay. Yes, now. Yeah, I think now everything is gonna work. So, hello, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whatever time you are watching this video. We are here tonight for this short talk about the Mercosur agreement. I hope we have a good conversation, and this is the idea. This is the Latin American Solidarity Center, and we welcome you to our YouTube channel. And we start asking you to subscribe to our channel, and please set a reminder to be updated about LASC videos and programs. LASC believes in a Latin America and in an island based on equality, social justice, and an equal realization of cultural, social, political, civil, and economic rights for all human beings. We are an NGO founded in 1996 by individuals and solidarity groups interested in the promotion of Latin American solidarity and culture in Ireland. Over the years, LASC has grown from a small niche organization into Ireland's foremost connected with Latin America's diverse social movements. For that reasons, we are here today to better understand the negative effects of Mercosur agreement to Europe. My name is Fernando Otero. I am the current chairperson of LASC, and I'm here to help you, the audience, to interact with our speaker, Liz Cunha, that's here today. And I want to ask her to give a brief hi to everybody. Thank you, Liz, for taking the time to be here with us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Yes, I'm Liz. I've been working with Greenpeace Germany for about a year now on the EU-Mercosur agreement. I was working on this topic already before in my previous job, so I've been following and researching it and campaigning against it for a while now.
That's great. I hope people can see you there. I am not sure, so please make a comment if you can see us. Liz is the trade expert at Greenpeace Germany, where she is the policy lead for the organization's work on the EU-Mercosur agreement. She has many years of experience on global economic justice issues with a focus on supply chains and trade. She previously worked in the European Parliament and the development NGO Action Aid. So to start this conversation, we are going to share a video from our former coordinator, Dr. Chris OConnell. He is the one that is at the moment the governance and civil society space advisor at Trocare and former LASC coordinator. Chris holds a PhD in politics from the School of Law and Government at Dublin City University, where his research focused on the influence of civil society on left-led governments in Latin America, and completed a postdoctoral research fellowship on the relationship between responses to climate change, environmental degradation, and contemporary forms of slavery. Chris has a long-standing interest in the impacts of trade and investment agreements with a focus of the proposed EU-Mercosur deal. Chris was supposed to be here today with us, but he had to travel to Brussels to be there for the CELAC meeting. So I think it was very good that he had the time to prepare this video, because we can understand what is the deal from the Irish perspective. So I am going to share this with you now, and then we will have Liz joining us for questions and answers, and we hope that everybody can join as well.
Hi, good evening. My name is Dr. Chris OConnell, and I'm a long-time LASC member, former coordinator of LASC, which is actually where I first started paying attention to this proposed EU Mercosur trade deal, and also a researcher associated with the School of Law and Government in DCU. And in fact, yeah, then it was through that I conducted some further research, in particular, I suppose, just in relation to Ireland and the EU Mercosur trade deal. So I have a short presentation that I'm going to run you through. I'm sorry that I couldn't be available live.
EU Mercosur trade deal.
Going to be in Brussels for an event, a sort of side event related to the EU CELAC summit that's taking place next week, and so that is, I suppose, also the background to this talk around the Mercosur trade deal, because it's one of the key issues for discussion at that summit, and indeed there have been targets set at least last year that the idea was to have the deal done and in place by the end of the summit. Although there still seems to be a little bit of distance between the parties on that. But I think someone like Liz, who's joining, will be in a better position to talk about that. So this is really just presenting a bit of research that was done, as I say, into Ireland's particular position, but it goes a little bit more deeply into some of the problems with the agreement as proposed, and sort of maybe looks at, you know, what kind of action should happen from Ireland. So so this image then shows some protests that were predominantly led by the farming lobby in Ireland, but it coincided with some of the worst wildfires in the Brazilian Amazon in particular, but also in Bolivia in 2019, and sort of the announcement of the sort of the agreement in principle in 2019 coincided with those wildfires, and so you know, of course the you know, environmental and other activists were also mobilizing, but in Ireland the predominant actor, at least in 2019, was the farming lobby. So this is just a quick overview of what I'm hoping to discuss. So the main focus will be on Ireland's Economic and Sustainability Impact Assessment, or ESIA, and that was a key, I guess, commitment by the government that came out of those protests. So the history, as I'm sure you hear, of EU Mercosur goes back over 20 years, but you know, fairly rapid progress was made during a kind of a political window of opportunity when there were some right-wing governments, in particular, in place in Brazil with the first the Temer and then the Bolsonaro governments, and the Macri government in Argentina. But it has galvanized opposition in both regions, and I'm sure Liz and others there will talk more about maybe the form that opposition takes in other parts of Europe and also in Latin America, in the Mercosur countries. But it has been both social and political, and my understanding is that, you know, countries like Austria, parts of Belgium, you know, to some extent France have proved the key sort of stumbling blocks politically in Europe to a deal. Ireland has been sort of hanging around the middle, I would say, trying to see which way the wind is blowing, and so following the protests in 2019, but also those other more overt political opposition, Ireland committed to commissioning its own economic and sustainability impact assessment, and it said that eventually said that the deal would not progress. in its current format. This ESIA, I actually, for full disclosure, as a LASC member and with someone with an interest in this, I participated in a stakeholder consultation that was carried out by consultants hired by the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment in 2020, alongside someone from Frontline Defenders and at least one researcher that I know, like a sustainability researcher, and yet the headline, when it was eventually published it took well over a year to get to that point, and it was sort of a little bit smuggled out during a quiet time in July of 2021. Was the main headline was, as we'll see here, that it was all about the headline figure of boosting Irish exports by over 1 billion euros. But a more systematic analysis revealed a number of problematic aspects with the ESIA in particular. And this is important, I think, because while the government have not made much of this to this point, I think it will be a crucial support that they will lean on when, as I'm pretty sure when, they try to push through the ratification of the agreement once the other European actors are lined up. So I think they're keeping their powder dry essentially at the moment with regard to this. And this, not to mix my metaphors too much, but keeping this in their back pocket. And so there are a lot of problems with this impact assessment. So I'll run through them. Some of them are technical, some of them are more straightforward. But in one case, I mean, certainly the modeling that they use has been heavily criticized. There was an open letter by 192 economists that was published by the Seattle to Brussels network that noted that this model was inadequate for assessing the social and environmental impacts, and particularly inadequate for things like tipping points. And I'm sure you will be aware that there's a lot of fear around this, around the Amazon, but not purely the Amazon, but particularly the Amazon, in terms of it converting tipping into being a net emitter of carbon. And overall, even though you read a lot of headlines, even just recently, about some relatively positive trends since the Lula government took office, the overall trend, it must be noted, is deforestation. What rises or lowers are the rates, and so they were on a sort of downward trajectory till around 2018, but still deforesting, and then shot up during the Bolsonaro years, and now seems to be maybe leveling off. But something else that the agreement doesn't mention at all is wildfires, which is unusual because that was one of the key elements of the protests in 2019. And of course, they're a driver of deforestation, but they're also both a cause and consequence of the climate crisis and emit high levels of carbon. And overall, the ESIA pays not a lot of attention to greenhouse gas emissions, but when it does finally mention them, it admits to a small increase in greenhouse gas emissions. Now, I think we all know where we're at, that, I'm not sure what small exactly constitutes. They try to compare it to other emitters, but there's a little bit of this free rider concept going on here. Well, if others are emitting more, ours isn't too bad. And finally, the general approach is very unsystematic, and even the language used, it tends to say things like everything that's negative is small, minor, inconsequential, and any possible economic benefits are blown up, as we can see in those headlines. And for example, the focus is purely on beef imports. There has been probably too much focus on beef in a lot of the earlier civil society activation around this issue, but actually I think there's a realization that actually soya and sugarcane in particular, which many consider is going to be the new driver of deforestation, are the key crops here. But also there's an interplay between them. These are tied together in systems, and so plucking one out from that sort of holistic approach doesn't give us a very clear picture. Similarly, the main focus is exclusively on the Amazon rainforest, So deforestation in Cerrado, Gran Chaco, Pantanal, other very important and at-risk biomes are not mentioned at all. And again, even despite all, stacking the deck so firmly in its favor, it still admits to minor increases in deforestation due to the signing of this agreement. In terms of human rights, the absence is much starker. It basically doesn't really engage with the issue at all. There's one mention of indigenous rights. Land rights or human rights defenders are not really mentioned at all. And yet there's other research that indicates that if there are even any economic gains from this, they will come at the expense of the lives and livelihoods of Brazil's indigenous people and communities. And there's a particular existential threat to the lives and cultures of uncontacted peoples in places like Paraguay. There's no mention at all of sort of civil society inclusion, participation of affected communities, free, prior, and informed consent. That isn't touched by this assessment. And labor rights are really only mentioned in passing. The fact that there are regular violations of labor rights in places like Brazil is not addressed. Forced labor is not addressed. And then there is this sort of political governance aspect, because a lot of this assessment and other SIAs that I've read tend to rely heavily on sort of a magical thinking where they say, well, this is possible. Things like the trade and sustainability development chapters and sustainable development chapters, they could create mechanisms for better enforcement, for better dialogue, for better political outcomes. But there's rarely any sort of decent political analysis that accompanies that. So it's all, there's no real statement of how this is going to happen or what mechanisms might enable it. It's just, we might be able to talk about this. So, it's clear, like from what I mentioned about the rates of deforestation, the differences between the pre-existing PT governments, the Bolsonaro government, and now to today, that deforestation is a political issue. And yet there is no real engagement with that, or any extent to which free trade agreements trying to kind of stack up and hold up this commodities consensus that Svante talks about, and that's prevalent in the region, slightly less so in Brazil than in most other countries. This SAA also says there's no need for any additional enforcement mechanisms, despite the fact that the TST chapter is non-binding, and that even in cases where there have been, innovative legislation, like in Argentina around the dry Chaco, there has, tended to be very little enforcement. So it's really not clear how, and this is very much contrasted as well with the trade pillars and other pillars around big commerce and business in general, which very much rely on hard law, whereas these sustainability and human rights aspects remain very much in the soft law sphere, and are basically there are no direct enforcement mechanisms. Other unaddressed issues then, so a lot of this SIA relies on the official EU SIA done by LSE Consulting, but that is problematic in itself. It's been heavily criticized by Emily O'Reilly, European Ombudsman, because it was released before the draftee was completed. And as she rightly says, how can you then, assess, how can you have an assessment of an agreement that you've already committed to? It's also, again, in that open letter by economists, based on misleading and biased models that underestimate the negative impacts of trade liberalization and basically ignore many of the environmental impacts. And also then this, SIA doesn't engage with a French government, SIA AMBEC commission, that came to radically different conclusions, that said basically that only looking at beef imports and exports from the region will result in the deforestation of an area the size of the Netherlands each year. Again, over the reliance on this TST chapter that I've talked about, the power there is really only to request discussions. And while we might say that the political status and situation in Mercosur is slightly more favorable to human rights and environmental sustainability now, it may not remain so, and that's a significant concern. And then, in terms of these enforcement mechanisms, sanctions models are or can be seen as quite controversial, but there are studies that suggest that they can be complementary to this more dialogue-based mechanism. And again, just having them there and the possibility of sanctions, which should be in both ways and reciprocal, but it does maybe lend force to those dialogues. And then, there is some also separate research that suggests that the EU's approach to things like sustainability and human rights and labor rights in particular in countries of the global south in particular is highly selective. And this research links that to the influence of big corporations over the EU. So there are a lot of issues there that this essay doesn't address. And then a big one for me is that it really seems to draw no lessons at all from the impacts of these so-called new generation free trade agreements, such as the EU, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador agreement. And just a few headlines from that, but the growth rates have been basically zero. There have been more jobs created, but essentially they are bad, insecure, precarious jobs in the agricultural sector at the cost of more secure industrial jobs. It's had a very negative effect on family farming. Peru, the home of the potato, is now reliant on imported potatoes. Negative impacts are admitted in EU reports on biodiversity, deforestation, water, air quality, and waste. There really have been non-existent actions to address labor issues. There was some hope that this TSD chapter would allow that, but a coalition of civil society organizations in Peru, for example, brought their concerns to the EU and nothing happened. And then if you look at, say, some of the research done by Christian Aid a couple of years ago on the Cerrejón mine that links the agreement to the expansion of the mine, to forced displacements and infringements of human and indigenous rights. And then it also contradicts the EU's own Green Deal in some of these commitments that it contains. So overall, I would say this is, the SIA itself is highly flawed, but a lot of that reflects, the flaws in the agreement. It does read very much like an attempt to minimize the clear negative impacts and to build up and perhaps overstate the economic impact. But we can see now where, from this statement by Simon Coveney earlier this year, where the thinking is at now in Ireland, which is their read of things, which is that the impact of the last few years, and particularly, COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine, all for them demonstrate the importance of diversifying their import and export markets, and that the Mercosur then fits firmly into this EU vision. What's missing from this? The climate crisis, clearly. Where's the thinking about that? It was, while not the only issue, obviously, because farmers have their own reasons in Ireland, and for many people that was the key issue back in 2019, and is even more so now. As we can see, we've just finished the hottest week that the planet has ever seen, and yet where's that mentioned here? Not mentioned at all. And so all of these issues to me are extremely concerning, and they stack up to a very negative outlook, and I think the way the deal is at the moment, with a basically unenforceable soft law sustainability and trade chapter, while very hard laws around the trade and intellectual property and other aspects, is certainly not fit for purpose, and just leaving out mentions of the climate crisis don't cut it. So that's a little bit of my analysis. I think from an Irish perspective, we need to be conscious of this assessment, but also generally of the mood within the government in Ireland. They've hedged their bets. The statement a couple of years ago was that we would not ratify it in its current state. The push is to have some sort of extra, it's called a legal instrument, but it seems like it will be more soft law and forms of words that can be appended onto the agreement. There's a lot of pushback from particularly Brazil to that, but that may be a negotiating position. But if Brazil lines up, we still have the likes of Austria that have been firmer, but I think it's fairly clear that Ireland will be pushing for its ratification. I think that's something that we in Ireland need to be conscious of, connected to others in Europe around, and possibly mobilized around in due course. So I'm going to stop my sharing there, and thank you for your attention. Again, apologies that I couldn't be with you this evening, but thanks to Fernanda and all at LASC for organizing this.
Yes, thank you, Chris, for taking the time to record this. This was very good, very useful. So, Liz, we know you are a specialist from Germany, and like all the knowledge you have, I would start asking you first of all, are you going to attend the CELAC meeting this week?
I'm not attending the official summit. The official summit is for the heads of state and government. And if I understand correctly, Chris was invited to the civil society forum that is taking place before. So a few days before. I'm not attending this. I will be in Brussels on Monday and Tuesday. We're going to be protesting against the EU-Mercosur agreement in Brussels in front of the European Parliament just before the summit starts. So there's going to be a lot of civil society activities against this agreement, and I'm going to be there.
And why are you protesting?
So we in Greenpeace, we've been working and campaigning against this agreement since 2019, and we started working on it because, as Chris was mentioning, there was a lot of attention about the Amazon forest fires and this clear knowledge that the agreement, by the fact that it reduces tariffs for beef from the Mercosur countries, for soy, for other agricultural products like sugarcane, this huge risk of deforestation increasing was something that, led us to start working on this agreement. But once we started actually analyzing the agreement in more detail, we found many other problems, many other aspects, even some that Chris didn't mention. So for the example, the fact that the agreement is going to reduce tariffs for pesticides as well. So Europe will be exporting more pesticides to South America, and as we know, they are used in huge amounts in agricultural production in countries like Brazil, with devastating impacts for the environment there, for biodiversity, and for the people. There are many cases of health impacts linked to the use of pesticide in the Brazilian agriculture. We have colleagues in Brazil working actively to reduce pesticide use in Brazil, but this agreement is going to lead to the opposite. It's going to lead to even more pesticides and more impacts. And of course, the general impact on the climate when you increase the use and trade of these kinds of products like beef that are very highly emitting in emissions. So we are campaigning against this agreement, and that is why I'm going to be in Brussels joining the protest. We've also, I think, one interesting aspect that Chris did not raise in his presentation, and is
because
one of
he was just taking up from the Irish perspective, and I think like Germany, it's kind of dealing with other section of the agreement. That's why it's so good having you here.
Yes,
Tonight.
yes, of course.
Yes.
So of course, I work with Greenpeace Germany, but we work very closely with our colleagues from Greenpeace Brazil, from Greenpeace Argentina, and from other countries. So we have an international campaign against this agreement at the moment. And one interesting or very problematic aspect of the agreement, my colleagues in Brazil and Argentina call this agreement a neo-colonial instrument, because it's going to increase exploitation of natural resources in South America for the profits and benefits of the European industry. So you could even hear this when Chris was reading the quote from the Irish minister, that his focus was on, having, increasing the imports and exports. And what is meant a lot in the political conversation at the moment is that the EU is desperate for more raw materials, for making sure that it secures access to raw materials. And these are, of course, taken with huge impacts on the environment and the communities nearby. And that is the point of this agreement. It's going to increase European Union's access to raw materials in South America at the expense of people and nature. so that the European industry can continue to grow and produce and export products like cars, combustion engine cars even, but also things like other industrial products or even chemical products like pesticides, as I mentioned before. So it's a new colonial instrument, and that's also one of the reasons why we're fighting against this and calling for the agreement to be fully renegotiated.
Yeah, I want to use the opportunity to tell people that is watching us, you can ask questions. We have the YouTube chat. I'm just connected there, so you can ask questions if you wish. And I forgot to mention at the very beginning of this live section that the LASCWED is a program supported by the Irish Aid Founding. So thank you for the Irish Aid for founding LASC and to help us to do our job. Liz, at the beginning of like last year, November 2022, there was a state from you. You said, without a radical rethink, the deal will drive the continued destruction of the Amazon and other vital ecosystems, accelerating the climate and nature crisis. Chris mentioned this complaint about the warmest week lately. Was there any improvement from your statement in November by now?
An improvement when it comes
like
to the
a radical thinking or a radical
Absolutely
thinking.
not. Rather the opposite. Well, I think you have to differentiate as well, because the European discourse, it's very self-focused. It's very focused on the European industry and the need for this agreement now because we need to secure the European industry. And this has continued, that has not changed. And you can see how that influenced the political decision-making in the European Union, but also in governments like Germany. And you hear this also in Ireland from the Irish government, that they really want this agreement no matter what. So the German government has set some vague conditions around sustainability, but it's very vague. Nobody knows exactly what this will mean. And the European Commission is just trying to add an annex to the agreement with some nice words about the environment, but not actually changing anything about the agreement. And that is the actual agreement, the actual tariff reduction for products like beef, like soy, like pesticides, this remains unchanged. No one is talking about addressing those, except, I guess, us as civil society. We say that this is a problem, but politicians are not looking into this. But on the other hand, we are hearing a lot of interesting statements from Lula and also from Fernandez, the Argentinian president, where they're raising some criticism against the agreement. From a few different perspectives, but I think one which is very interesting, and Lula said this just last week, was that he's not interested in trade agreements that will condemn Brazil to the role of being just the exporter of raw materials and commodities. So this new colonial argument and the concerns that it will lead to deindustrialization of the Brazilian economy, that is quite interesting. So the negotiations at the moment are a bit stuck, because Brazil and Argentina have a different understanding of what they want this agreement to be compared to the EU, which is just wanting to quickly finalize it.
Yeah, there was on the same piece of you wrote in November 2022. I also want to read something you said because I think it's important. Lula's victory offers the unique chance to reveal the entire agreement, putting environmental and social concerns as a priority. Have you changed your mind after 7 months of his government? Are you following, apparently as you are, you just said that, but do you think that he's doing well?
When it comes to the agreement, we still don't know exactly what he wants. So he's been making different kinds of statements. So it's a bit of speculation until we see what exactly he's proposing. I think it's already quite interesting to see how he's changing the power dynamics in the discussions, because when we had Bolsonaro, the EU was the one holding all the cards and saying what they want, and the Mercosur countries didn't have much power against it. They were just waiting to see what the European Union is going to do when it comes to this agreement. And now Lula has changed the balance. So he's saying, you know, no, I have some conditions. I have some problems with this agreement, and you have to wait for me to say what I want. That is already quite interesting. But until we see what exactly are the proposals that he's putting on the table, I mean, I think we can already expect that he's not going to propose complete renegotiations, which is what we think is necessary if we really want to have a sustainable agreement, because the products this agreement is encouraging are just so negative for the environment and for the climate and for human rights. And I haven't heard Lula proposing to change that.
Okay. What you just mentioned there, Brazil and Argentina. What about Uruguay's position?
Uruguay is in favor of the agreement. Uruguay is wanting to conclude more free trade agreements with more countries. So at the moment, it's really, the dynamic is that Brazil and Argentina have concerns. Uruguay wants the agreement, Paraguay as well. But at the moment, it's all hanging on Brazil and Argentina.
Okay. And what are you expecting for the following days? Do you expect an improvement on the negotiation, like the job you are doing? What are the main activities you are leading for the next days?
So the next days, concretely around the summit that is going to take place in Brussels. So we're organizing with many other organizations from civil society. So trade union organizations from Latin America are coming to Brussels as well. We have indigenous peoples coming from Latin America. We're going to meet farmers groups as well. We're all gathering in Brussels to organize some activities. We're organizing a conference, which will include a panel about the EU-Mercosur agreement in the European Parliament and the protest that I mentioned that is taking place on Monday. So watch out for images of that and for social media materials. What do we expect? It's still very unsure. And I think that's also one of the problems with these negotiations. It's so intransparent. We never really know what's going on because it's all happening behind closed doors. So we get some information here or there, you know, a new document was leaked. It was not officially published. So we don't really know exactly what is going on and what kind of trade-offs might happen behind closed doors. But we'll be trying to monitor it and trying to make some counter power to stop this agreement.
Okay.
But what will happen, we will see. So I can update you on Tuesday.
Nice. I'll be watching closely and sharing whatever needed because LASCWED is campaigning. We also disagree, like we don't want the Mercosur agreement at all. Chris just mentioned there the European Green Deal goals. Can you just explain a little bit more? What is this?
The European Green Deal was a big set of policies that the European Commission presented a few years ago, and along with it came a lot of different packages. So it goes from different environmental policies, looking into even reduction of pesticides use in the European Union, looking into how to reduce the footprint of the European Union consumption when it comes to impacts on forests outside the European Union. There's a lot of legislation also when it comes to reducing the emissions. So it's this huge package that is, it's not fully implemented yet. Some of them are still on the way and being negotiated, but it's this huge package that this trade agreement kind of completely disregards. It just goes in the opposite direction. It's okay, you want to reduce emissions in the EU? Okay, but we're still going to continue with this agreement, which is going to increase emissions in the Mercosur countries. Or, you know, we want to reduce pesticide use in the European Union. Okay, but let's export more pesticides to South America. So the agreement is in full contradiction to the goals of the European Green Deal. It's also one of our main criticism that is just completely not aligned at all. And unfortunately, the economic interests here are taking precedence over these environmental policies.
Yeah, so I have a question for you, and I want you to tell us, what do you think that it's possible to stop the agreement?
I think even raising awareness, because I think it's not a topic that is discussed in the general public. So I think, events like this are very important, but also, bringing some information stands in the middle of the city and taking contact with your politicians. I think that is still very important, and I think it can make a big difference because soon, possibly, there might be a vote, an actual vote in the EU Council, and the Irish government will have to take an official stand and say either we vote in favor or we vote against. So anything that you can do to influence, to raise awareness of the general public and put pressure on the politicians, there's still time for that. We don't have a date for the vote yet. So anything that you can do to put pressure can be very helpful.
Yes, Lula is telling everywhere he goes that he wants the agreement by the end of the year. So we shall see.
Earlier in January, he said he wanted the agreement by June, and we're in the middle of July, and the agreement is not there. So I think we can, take with a grain of salt what Lula says and what is actually achieved in the very difficult negotiations.
Do you think he is playing the main role now?
I think a lot is riding on his hands at the moment. The European Commission is just waiting for his response, or for the official Mercosur response, for which Lula and his government are currently developing the proposal.
Yeah, because last time he was in Paris, he just said he had loads of conversations with Macron, and he said the biggest border of France is with Brazil because of the Guyana. So I think France is also playing an important role there. I have another question for you. What's the strategy from Germany to succeed? Okay, let me translate. Okay, so what's the strategy for Germany to approve the agreement without go through the parliament, to the Germany parliament?
Yeah, that's a very important issue. So the agreement, the way that it was designed, it should be voted first in the European Council. So the governments should approve it, and they should approve it in unanimity. So every single EU government should have to say yes for this agreement to pass.
Mm-hmm.
The second stage is that it goes to the European Parliament, where a majority is needed. And as a third stage, the agreement needs to be approved by all the national parliaments throughout the EU. So it's a very lengthy process. And when we know that countries like Austria, France, parts of Belgium are against the agreement, so it's actually very good chances that we stop the agreement. But the European Commission knows this, and they're concerned that they will not be able to get this agreement through. So what the European Commission is planning is to do a technical trick. It's called splitting. It's going to split the agreement into two parts so that the trade part can be approved in the Council, so by EU member states, only with a majority. So no EU government would have a veto anymore. So the opposition of countries like Austria and France would not matter, because the agreement could still be approved. Then it goes to the European Parliament, and then that's it. It doesn't have to then go through all the national parliaments. So it would be a very, undemocratic way to bypass the vetoes of governments and also to bypass the democratic debate at the national level in the parliaments. So we're criticizing this, but yeah, we need to make much more noise to stop this from happening, because the EU Commission is planning to do it, but they are not able to go through it until the negotiations are over.
I want to say hi to Passarinho, that is watching us from Brazil. If you have any questions, Passarinho, se você tiver alguma pergunta, você pode escrever em português, que eu vou traduzir. I will translate to English. Saying hi to Marita Finnegan. It's watching us. I don't know where she is. Where are you, Marita? Okay, so I have another question for you. Where we can find your work, like your research, your main, I think Greenpeace is playing, of course, an important and necessary role. Where can we find your work about the impacts of the agreement?
So we have really a lot of studies that you can find if you go to the Greenpeace European Union website. So our office in Brussels, you'll find all of our main publications in English there. If you want publications in Portuguese, you can go to Greenpeace Brazil, just Google Greenpeace Brazil and EU Mercosur, or UE, Mercosur, and you'll find a lot of materials in Portuguese as well. But also, we are part of a big coalition of more than 450 civil society organizations against this agreement. And if you research us, Stop EU Mercosur Coalition, there you're going to find a lot more materials from other organizations as well. And there's also a petition that has been going on for a couple of years. We have more than 1 million signatures collected, and you can, if you go to the website, you can sign on to it as well.
Can I just ask you a question, just to my memory? So, who was, like, because the agreement was, Bolsonaro brought this, the agreement is done, and then which countries stopped that to move on?
It was criticism from, primarily France and Austria, but also there were some decisions taken in parliaments throughout Belgium against the agreement, and then there was a resolution by the European Parliament, which said that the European Parliament would not approve the agreement as it is. And that was kind of then the moment where the European Commission started working on this addendum annex.
Yeah, would that work if we send them, if we work with this, like the of course, just to guarantee? Is there any campaign we can make on these countries or on the European Parliament? How can we help? What can we do, Liz, to show, like, to help?
I think first and foremost to do the campaign at the national level, so to really try to influence the Irish government and just to make sure. I mean, I'm finding out even in our campaign in Germany that there's a lot of politicians that don't know about it. So even reaching out to all the politicians that you have contacts with or that you know have some kind of power in Ireland at the moment, and making pressure against this agreement and show your criticism, that would be really important. And once we know how the negotiations are going, if there's a date for a vote in the European Parliament, for example, then it's of course very useful if people get involved with the Irish members of the European Parliament as well.
Okay, we have a question here from Ruben. Hello, Ruben, good to see you there. He's saying, sorry if this point has already been discussed, but does Greenpeace have a petition to stop or revise the agreement? And can you share the link to the petition?
So if you go to the Stop EU Mercosur Coalition website, there's a petition there that you can sign on to.
Great. Okay, so I think we have that on LASCWED already, because we are just like posting and sharing, whatever we can find. Liz, we are very happy to have you. It's a pleasure. We are happy that you were able to attend today. Just to close this meeting, do you have any message that you want to leave?
Just to say the fight is not over. I think we can still stop this agreement. It's definitely not a time to give up. Start making noise, start making pressure on politicians, and start informing the public about it, because no one I've ever told about this agreement thought that this sounds like a good thing. I think it's very clear that it's just going to have a lot of negative impacts for all of us. So as people living in this planet. So don't give up and try to make some noise.
Yeah, I just want to close this meeting with our words. There is no trade on a dead planet. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We will be back with LASCWED. Please share this video and follow us and subscribe to our channel. Have a great evening. Thank you.